Welcome to Module 6 of the Documenting NEPA Categorical Exclusion course, brought to you by the Local Programs Office of the Washington State Department of Transportation. This module will discuss the topics of noise, stormwater, environmental commitments, and environmental justice. You may find it helpful to follow along with the CE form, which is available on the Local Programs Environmental Services website. There are multiple modules hosted on our website, so be sure to watch them all. FHWA's noise policy is written into the Code of Federal Regulations. It is extremely prescriptive and does not allow for much wiggle room. It does, however, task states with crafting their own local noise policies that implement this code. Earlier this year, WashDOT updated their noise policy and FHWA approved it. This revised noise policy includes a new decision tool allowing streamlined compliance with the noise regulations. Before we jump into the noise policy changes, let's first see when a project is required to address traffic noise. This box on the CE form is a screen to determine if further noise investigation is warranted. Typically, where local agencies end up needing noise studies is when a project either adds capacity to the roadway or reduces the distance between the fog line and a receiver by half or more. If the vertical alignment is changing by more than 5 feet or so, we will also need to take a closer look at the project. And lastly, any new road segment will require a noise study, even if it is only a city block long. For a noise barrier to be required, it must meet both the reasonable and the feasible criteria. To be reasonable means that it is cost-effective. There is a formula written into the WashDOT noise policy that is used to calculate how much money can be spent for each benefiting receiver. If the barrier exceeds the dollar amount allotted to the receivers, it is not deemed reasonable. To be feasible means that the barrier can be physically built and also achieve the required noise reductions per the WashDOT noise policy. Most local agency projects do not meet both of these requirements and therefore do not require noise walls. The feasibility performance requirement is typically unattainable in an urban street grid. The reasonable criteria is often not met in rural areas that lack sufficient population density. Recognizing this, we have updated the WashDOT noise policy to help streamline compliance when you check yes on either the second or third questions in the noise box on the CE form. The noise chapter of the CE guidebook describes the 3 types of noise analysis now available per the 2020 WashDOT noise policy. There is also a decision tree to determine which level applies to your project. The first question asks about traffic volumes and posted speed limits. If your project meets either one of these criteria, then the FHWA Low Volume Road tool can be used. This tool is available on FHWA's Traffic Noise Model website. This will not require field measurements or a project-specific noise model. If your project fails this screen, then a noise model will need to be developed for the project. If your project fails the screening questions on the previous slide, or the results from the Low Volume Road tool indicate impacts, then a project-specific noise model will be needed. This will include field measurements, model validation, and a noise barrier analysis. If the barrier analysis determines 3 or more receivers will benefit from the wall, then a complete noise study will be required, including the cost-benefit analysis. We are hopeful that these new noise impact thresholds will help right-size the level of effort required on local agency projects.
Part 4, number 11, addresses water quality and stormwater. For this question, the project will need to be at a point in design where basic stormwater information is known. Projects need to be consistent with the guidelines provided by the Washington State Department of Transportation's Highway Runoff Manual, Washington State Department of Ecology's Stormwater Management Manual, or a local agency equivalent manual. If a project cannot meet these requirements, an explanation will need to be provided explaining the situation and the proposed runoff treatment and flow control for new and any existing pollution-generating impervious surface associated with the project. Notify the local program's environmental contact for the project early if this is the situation. Further environmental discussion will need to occur. Pollution-generating impervious surface, which is also known as PGIS, is an impervious surface that is considered a significant source of pollutants and stormwater runoff, including surfaces that receive direct rainfall or run on or blow in of rainfall and are subject to vehicular use. The Washington State Department of Transportation Highway Runoff Manual provides further details and descriptions of PGIS. Question 11B requires the calculation of all the existing PGIS within the project area. This needs to be calculated in square feet. When calculating PGIS, you will need to look at all the areas that vehicles can drive on. This includes compact gravel surfaces and bike lanes without physical barriers separating them from vehicular travel lanes. For example, a bike lane that is only separated from the roadway by a striped line would be considered PGIS. If a bike lane is separated from the roadway by a curb or landscaping, it would not be considered PGIS. Question 11C requires the calculation of all the new PGIS that will be created as a result of the project. This does not include the existing areas of PGIS that may be resurfaced. It is strictly just new areas. Question 11D requires the calculation of all the proposed post-project untreated PGIS. This area includes all previous and new PGIS within the project area. The calculations in the water quality and stormwater section are important to understand the impacts to endangered species. When the environmental documentation for endangered species is being reviewed, the quantity of new PGIS will be taken into account. Other information that will be needed in the endangered species portion is how the stormwater is being treated and what happens to the stormwater. For example, if a stormwater pond has an outlet, where does the stormwater go once it leaves the outlet? Does it flow through a pipe to a waterway? Module 7 discusses the Endangered Species Act. Part 4, number 12, addresses previous environmental commitments. Environmental commitments include both mitigation required through environmental permitting and conservation measures that are made to agencies or the public to mitigate a project's environmental impacts. Commitment tracking is the local agency's responsibility. Potential sources of environmental commitments can be found in a variety of documents. Potential documents can be past NEPA documents, Section 106 Memorandum of Agreements, biological opinions, and permits from other projects. There may also be past commitments to stakeholders. One example is that within the project impact area, there may be a previous mitigation site that was constructed as part of another project. Another example may be a riparian corridor that is supposed to remain undisturbed according to a conservation easement or biological opinion. Purchasing contaminated property can also be an environmental commitment. The property may have mandated cleanup requirements. It is important to identify any previous environmental commitments early in the project planning. This will ensure that the project can make appropriate design considerations, scheduling adjustments, and seek additional funding if needed. Work with the local program's environmental contact for the project if there are questions regarding how to address the commitments.
This topic is a combination of a few different regulations. Executive Order 12898, Environmental Justice in Minority and Low-Income Populations. Executive Order 13166, Improving Access to Services for Persons with Limited English Proficiency, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Collectively, we refer to this topic as environmental justice, or EJ for short. It tasks us with ensuring that our projects do not have a high or disproportionate impact on low-income or minority populations. Local Programs has negotiated a few tools with FHWA to streamline EJ decisions. The first is Appendix L in the CE Guidebook. Your entire project needs to fit within the exemptions listed. Multiple exemptions can apply to a project. Typically, right-of-way acquisition or detours will kick your project out of the exemptions. But don't worry, we have another tool. Appendix M in the CE Guidebook has our new EJ matrix. This is designed as a decision tree. Starting at the top of the page, each time you answer yes, drop down to the next question. Once you reach a no answer, you stop working down the page and provide what is asked. If the final question you land on is 1, 2, 3, or 4, then you only need to supply demographic data and the final matrix question number. If you make it all the way down to question 5, written documentation will need to be added to your CE package. To use the EJ matrix, we need two sources of demographic data. One of them must be census data, which is most easily obtained from the EPA EJ Screen GIS-based web tool. Please remember to set the search parameter for a half-mile radius from the project as drawn on the web tool map. An easy second data source is hosted on the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction's K-12 report card website. We recommend drilling down to the elementary school level to get dataset geographies that most accurately match your project study area. If you land on question 5 of the EJ matrix, you will need to provide some form of written documentation about the project's impact on EJ populations. If the project will relocate less than 10 households or businesses, an EJ memo can likely meet this need. If your project exceeds 10 relocations, you will need to prepare an EJ discipline report. This requires robust public engagement and close coordination with your local program's NEPA specialist. The EJ memo includes a description of the project, its right-of-way needs, detour lengths with durations, and any transit, traffic, and noise impacts. If relocations are required, a description of the affected parties will need to be included, as well as a statement affirming compliance with the Uniform Relocation Act. Outcomes from public outreach should also be included if available. And finally, the EJ memo also needs a commitment to follow your agency's Title VI plan when communicating with the public. Thank you for watching this module of the Documenting NEPA Categorical Exclusion course. There are other modules available on our website, so be sure to check them out.